Let's talk about big data here, and then we'll talk about big data in the context of marketing challenges. So I love all these sparklers. They're fun to collect, different sources of information, different places about all the things that are adding to our world, and in some cases cluttering our world. You know, whether it's mobile devices and tweets and all the things we do on the web, and there's an incredible flow of information taking place, brought about by the kinds of devices, high bandwidth communication, accessibility, and obviously as the cost of computing comes down, the cost of storage comes down, the possibilities of storing that information and then doing something with it becomes increasingly intriguing. And I think we're all anxious to predict the future. We would all love to predict the future. We'd like to know what's going to happen next, whether it's next week, next month, maybe even in the next few minutes or seconds. And so there is tremendous possibility here. How do you corral all this information? And of course, some of this is well-defined, sort of classical enterprise data, well-structured. But then you think about the voice and social media, and of course you get into what's happening around sensing devices and passive information collection. These numbers are exploding. That really is quite remarkable, the amount of data that we as a human species generate. And you can see, some feedback here that we've been collecting, in terms of value. There's sort of, on the one hand, an explosion of information or explosion of data. On the other hand, often a challenge as to, well, how do I turn this into useful information? If I spend the money to collect it, can I get any value from it? And certainly in IBM, we've experienced some projects with some of our clients where a lot of data was being collected, but a real struggle to figure out how do you get value out of it? How do you take action? Just knowing that something appears to be true doesn't mean you can do anything about it to affect your future. These things do matter, however, whether you're talking about healthcare, government processes. Obviously, for this audience, notions of missed sales, the opportunity, that moment of truth when you have a potential to close a sale and realize some revenue. Have you touched that customer effectively? Is your outreach on the mark at that particular point in time when the buyer is primed to do something? And so there are a series of high-value areas, and some have, frankly, greater near-term payback possibility than others, but they all represent opportunities that we're engaged in. Clearly, complex data exploration and visualization, things like security and intelligence, these have become big data problems. The number of cybersecurity events and things that are happening are of such a nature today that no human being can keep up with it. If you're the responsible security executive in a company, you need computer-based assistance in order to be able to track all the events and know what things you ought to be investigating in the context of cyber threat and cyber challenge. Other things in the physical world. We do many projects with all kinds of companies that struggle with things like preventive maintenance and predictive maintenance with very good, outstanding return characteristics in exploiting big data-based techniques for data collection, analysis, and then being able to deal with the challenges of dealing with predictive and preventive maintenance for physical equipment. Where this gets more interesting and often fuzzy are these notions about enhanced views of customers, 360-degree view, what's the customer doing? And if I know more about what they're thinking, what their preference is, can I do a better job of serving them? And that's the challenge, I think, that for this group here that you face. And certainly we face this with almost all of our customers today that have any sort of customer-facing business, client-facing business. It's getting to the bottom of what data is of what value. From an advertising and marketing perspective, we would divide this domain up into sort of four, principal groupings: audience, customer optimization, channel optimization in terms of how you're, what channel vehicles you're using to reach, advertising yield and optimization. I think your panel was talking about some of these things, and of course targeted media buying. And frankly, you really have to look at these things often in combination. It's not coming at it from one angle, but actually looking at the composite of the monies that are being spent across a variety of different vehicles. In my part of IBM's business, I have responsibility not just for the products that we make, but for all the marketing and all the sales activity related to those products. And I spend billions of dollars a year in go-to-market. I spend in excess of $500 million a year in direct marketing activities, more than that when I add in advertising and some of the other elements associated with our go-to-market structures. I'm constantly trying to get effective, efficient value out of the sum total of the money that I spend, and I look at it in combination. It's the combination of how am I touching the audience, how do I leverage the channels, do I use the channels correctly for the audiences that I'm trying to reach, how does my direct face-to-face marketing working versus my digital marketing, are those things being done in combination? I get a multiplier effect when I do things correctly in combination, and I get a dissipation of dollar value when I don't bring the pieces together effectively. The scattershot campaign or program that never delivers on the full promise because you fail to rally all the elements together. Understanding how well you're doing at that, your data sources, the information base underneath these efforts is absolutely critical to getting value. Marketers face big data challenges. I think you sort of all know that in terms of this is some survey work that we've done relative to this whole area of data collection, and gaining strategic insights. And we all tend to struggle with different aspects of cost and utilization and effectiveness relative to how we go about these things. Let me give you a couple of examples, and then I'll wrap up on a few things relative to IBM's portfolio specifically. And so I pulled a few examples here of the many that we have turned into references relative to the kinds of things that we try to do. A lot related to marketing efficiency, response rates around marketing campaigns and programs, the application of analytic technique, and trying to drive up the response rate. You all know that response rates around these kinds of digital marketing and promotional campaigns are what you struggle with, right? You're trying to get that response rate up. And so the application of effective analytics, who's the target audience? Are you targeting the right people? I mean, the beauty of what's happened around in the world that we live in is that this electronic interconnect capability has given us extraordinary power to target, literally right down to the individual. Certainly within groupings, it's possible for you to create targeted and focused initiatives, to time those things based upon your perception of what that particular audience might be interested in, and to vary the kinds of offers, merchandising, and promotion activity based upon what you perceive certain buyer groups are going to be most interested in. This example is one using some of our statistical technologies in order to effectively deal with better targeting, lower churn, and different results. Another one from Europe around television programs and viewer satisfaction. We're being called in increasingly within the media industry to look at different aspects of media delivery, effectiveness of media delivery, and what do people like and dislike. How can you be more predictive relative to what the viewers want to see? So, granted, you might have produced something, but how you distribute it, how you deliver it, and if it's something that has some ongoing life to it, can you make changes to it along the way? Do you change your promotion? You think of the movie industry. How many of us have been attracted to go see a movie because we love the trailer? And we probably all had the experience that when we saw the movie, we said, the best scenes were in the trailer. I went to see this movie because I love the trailer. The rest of it wasn't nearly as exciting as the trailer was. That's clever marketing. That's understanding your customer. That's understanding what the viewer is going to be interested in. And so analyzing these responses is something that we see going on increasingly. And it's all about reaching out to the web, scraping the data, webs, tweets, discussion forums, things that are readily available, and understanding the pros and cons, the positives and negatives, and then reacting to it appropriately. Yet another example here in the Netherlands in the retail industry. Shopping cart, website effectiveness, how much abandonment. How many times does somebody attempt to buy something and fail to do so? How many times does somebody fill a cart only to reduce the number of items in the cart? Do you really understand the way in which your customers are traversing across your website, taking advantage of your e-commerce capabilities, and are they buying what you expect them to buy, given the navigational patterns that you set up for them and perceive they were going to follow, versus the navigational patterns that they actually followed. And so it's increasing that sales ratio. This is an example in the banking industry. Sometimes controversial in terms of do you understand what your customers think about you, and are you being proactive in reaching out to those that are dissatisfied? And sometimes customers want to hear from you when they're dissatisfied. The fact that they express their dissatisfaction doesn't always mean they are anxious to get a phone call from somebody from your company. But BBVA certainly has taken on a very proactive approach to try to deal with the negatives that they pick up from the web information scraping that they do to see if they can improve their customer service and address those areas that are customer dissatisfiers. Merkle, relationship marketing, and really in taking advantage of what can be done with today's high performance, relatively low cost computing environments in terms of the amount of data that be collected, the reduction in processing time, which means what you're looking at is current. It's trying to get away from that retrospective view of what your customer did last week or that last month, right down to the day by day, even up to the minute analysis of customer preference and customer behavior. And Catalina marketing. Again, another example, massive amounts of data ingestion, clearly levels of data that would have been unaffordable to ingest and analyze 5 or 8 years ago. Has now come into focus for them in terms of the ability to afford the technology, apply advanced algorithms, and cut the processing time down dramatically in terms of these scoring types of applications. This is a big area of investment for us. I'm not going to bore you with all the logos, but these are a whole range of companies that IBM has acquired, specifically focused on information management, and this phenomenon of big data and analytics. And it's been a long journey of acquisitions, $20+ billion invested on top of organic investments that are in a couple of $1 billion a year range to build out a very complete portfolio that deals with both the infrastructure side of collecting and managing data, combined then with the analytics side of teasing out the hidden jewels, if you will, in that data. And it takes quite a broad portfolio of capability. Some industries are looking for immediate real-time analysis. Other industries are more in a retrospective approach. Some industries care about what customers have to say and are trying to collect web entries and tweets and so on. Others are less customer-focused, and they're dealing more with physical infrastructure and other aspects of operational analysis and optimization. All of these projects that we do tend to follow a common process that begins with the data itself and really understanding what data is collected already. Most companies are already collecting a lot of data. What other sources should be brought together? How should that data be organized and structured? Is it a real-time environment, in which case you're going to take on one set of characteristics? But almost invariably, you create a landing zone for the information. You filter out the noise. You create usable data structures that you can then analyze, whether you're using algorithmic techniques, statistical techniques, different approaches to understand the data. There's a need for this iteration and exploration. There's a need for continuity and data governance to know that what you looked at today in terms of the sources you're using is consistent with what you had been doing before, so you build a long-term track record. Typically, these environments get more effective through time as both the data builds, the data filtering builds, and then you tease out more patterns that you can turn into some form of direct query, direct analysis capability. As I said, very broad portfolio of offerings that we've built up over quite a long period of time to complete this capability. And we missed one more slide. Let's see. Yeah, we dropped off. Let me just do it in words. So the last thing I was going to mention was things we're doing around this technology we refer to as Watson. So this is something we worked on for quite a while at IBM. It's now rolling out into the marketplace in a smaller form. What you saw us play Jeopardy with was a much more massive system than most companies would typically want to buy. But we've miniaturized this and made it possible now to create a next best action system and advisor. This idea of natural language understanding. The more complexity you have around the topic, the way in which language is used, the more challenges you have in being able to create rules and relationships. So the extent to which the computer can provide language parsing, language understanding, create relationships and associations between topics and activities to their attributes. And that ability then to compare back and forth starts to give you yet another way in which to tease out the hidden value within the information and potentially surface things that are actually correlated and statistically true. And that statistical truth is important. If you're going to change something in your business, is this merely a relationship or is it truly a correlated effect that I can take action on? In many areas, the complexity of the information, the quantity of the information makes it so challenging that you can't quite get to something that you can truly codify in rules. And that's where these types of cognitive technologies come into play. Built on ideas and computer science constructs that have been with us for decades, but we're at a point now in the first time, really, in the history of the tech industry, where this now has become affordable to where just about any business can afford a cognitive system that actually can be utilized to deliver real business value. We see this as a big shift that'll take place throughout the rest of this decade and into the next in terms of exploiting these cognitive capabilities on top of more traditional analysis approaches. So with that, I'll invite Michael up and we'll move on to the dialogue.
Hopefully, taking a page from what you talked about, your trailer won't be overshadowed by our movie. I think that the trailer was pretty good, so I'm going to try and live up to the good parts.
I spoke as fast as I can. I am a New Yorker, so I can go pretty quick.
Well, listen, I was trained as a lawyer, so I listened slowly, but it's because I needed to bill more hours. But all kidding aside. Let me start off with something that I think is important in the marketplace today, and you guys are at the forefront of it. I was given a statistic, and I think we've all heard this, but I was given the statistic the other day that by 2016 or 2017, more technology decisions will be, and more technology purchase decisions, candidly, will be made by the CMO than by the CIO or the CTO. So from the perspective of IBM, you've got a different customer. You've got a different person that you're selling to in some context. How's that working out? And do you see it? Do you see that shift as pronounced as we continue to hear about it in the marketplace?
Well, I absolutely see it as pronounced and incredibly important. And I think the CMO probably stands out somewhat more perhaps than some other C-level roles, but I think, in fact, that trend line towards more of these technology decisions being driven by not just the CMO, but the head of sales, chief procurement. Information technology is the thing that transforms everything we do. When you think about marketing and the challenges of marketing, what's effective? What really has impact? How do I know it's having impact? And we all sit in these meetings talking about the way we spend our money, and what do we know about the impact we're having? And are we just merely following a technique that's been followed in the past because that's what people came to believe to be the common approach or the standard approach? Or are we taking a new approach to looking at what all the information tells us? And certainly CMOs in many companies now are kind of at the forefront of advanced analytic work, where given the size of their total marketing budget, what percentage of that perhaps ought to get shifted into some technology investments that are going to yield better value on the other investments that they make. So it's not that their whole world becomes digital, but the application of digital and the effectiveness becomes a critical issue. We see it not just in the IBM company, where we've been shifting a lot of our analytic investments into marketing. We see it in lots of other firms as well.
But you mentioned the guys from procurement, the folks from procurement. Excuse me. How active do you see them getting in that conversation? We know they're getting involved in purchase decisions all the time, and the challenge to most of us in the media and marketing industry is the kinds of logic that sometimes procurement applies to the buying of pencils or something else may not apply to the purchase in the marketing and media sense. And yet, and I've said this many times, I think if this were an orchestra, procurement deserves an important seat in the orchestra. It's just not first chair violin. How are you finding that in your marketing efforts for the?
Well, it'll vary by company in terms of how strong is procurement within the corporate culture. Clearly, procurement people will want to get involved in determining what's being acquired, but not every technology solves the problem the CMO is trying to solve. So, you do need an educated CMO, or at least a CMO with an educated team, that understands, what are best practices. I think the more you apply analytic technique and you have cause and effect, you can drive, what technology decision is being made, and you're not victimized by the CMO or for that matter, the CIO. Companies that do this well, I think, have a good alliance between the CMO and CIO. CIO helps take the lead, on aspects of procurement and buying and what represents best value for the chosen technology. And then the procurement people do their job, but they become an adjunct in effect to what the CMO and CIO work on together. I think that marriage, if you will, that partnership between the CMO and CIO is absolutely critical for effective use of technology, not just the procurement of technology.
Absolutely. Steve, let me switch gears for a second. I was in a meeting today with a large publisher who shall, by definition, remain nameless, but they were talking about a demand, and I maybe it's a little strong to call it a demand, but a request coming from one of the largest marketers in the world for tremendous access to data that this publisher has. And, in something that could have been tantamount to an antitrust violation, I witnessed two publishers having the conversation, not in this room, but saying, gee, what are you going to do? We don't want to give them that data, and they really want it. And we heard this morning about sort of private marketplaces and the opportunities around direct relationship between publishers and marketers. It's not the dreaded disintermediation word that we used so frequently a couple of years ago, but it's on the verge of that. And so on the one hand, you've got the marketers demanding to own the data, more importantly, and on the other hand, you've got the push-pull around people wanting to just deal directly with the brand.
Sure.
How do you think that's getting done, and how do you sort of see IBM's role in that conversation?
Well, we certainly see it, as a growing contest in a sense, and it sort of has to do with how much value gets extracted at what level, what information is perceived as carrying more value than another. So it does come down to economics. There's no question that money is at the root of it. And we've watched information, syndicated data related to in the consumer packaged goods industry, buying data, store data, point of sale data. Some companies hold that very close. Others do some data sharing. There are syndicators out there. There is a model for monetizing data, sharing data, albeit at a fee, right? And that contest as to who gets what piece of the pie, I don't think is going to go away. I think those that are very good at figuring out not only just how to collect it, but how to monetize it, likely can build some good business models around that. The more protective you are, I think the more challenge you have in creating velocity around your data selling. And so you have to find that balance point. But I certainly think that a lot of this debate around information and who owns what and how much you pay for it's going to rage on for quite a few years to come.
So Steve, I had the good fortune of chatting with an associate of yours at Demexco in Germany a couple of weeks ago with Kevin Bishop. And we talked there about the shift in IBM. And I think it's one of the great corporate stories in fairness and in a highly complimentary way, because you talked about being involved in data for 40 years. I'm only 35, so I wouldn't be able to relate to that. But could I relate to that? I would remember when IBM was a product company and not a service company. And that's how I remember thinking about IBM growing up. Today, I think of IBM as somebody who's really gone from a product company to a service company. It's been done pretty elegantly, and the shift is historic. How's that? You're part of that shift.
No,
so.
I'm not sure I applied. I lived it. I wouldn't apply the word elegant to it. More than a little pain along the way, but no pain, no gain, right?
Exactly.
I think that I'm not sure that our journey is necessarily all that different from others. No two companies are identical.
Well, but
we had to.
But let me just say something. Historically, companies, and I know this statistic is accurate, and it kind of is the railroad story. Companies that dominated one era don't necessarily make the transition to dominate another area. If the railroads were in the transportation business, they'd have owned the airlines. Instead, they were in the railroad business. You really transitioned from a dominant position in one era to a equally dominant position in another area. So
We
there's
had
not
to
many
move.
companies who have done that.
We had to keep moving. We had to move away from being driven entirely by hardware to more about software and services. And truth be known, more about outcomes. I mean, we need to be in the outcomes business. That's what we came to the realization of, that it was more about the outcome for the client than it was about the technology. As much as we love technology and we love to invent things, and there's a lot of thrill that goes with being a technology business. But you can't be too obsessed with your perspective of that, because that's not where the value is delivered in the marketplace. The people that pay the bills for us every day are our customers that are looking for outcome. They want business result. The technology is a means to an end. And if they believe they can get it from somebody else and achieve that end more efficiently, more effectively, better price, they'll do that. So, we had to shift our focus to being much more outcomes driven than technology driven. That doesn't mean that you get every outcome from every technology choice. So we have to provide that differentiation and value proposition around the technology itself. But if you lose sight of the customer's buying outcome, you pretty much lose your way in the market. These transitions, other companies go through it.
But they don't all succeed as you do.
They don't all make it across to the other side. And by the way, we're not done. The industry that we're in keeps changing, and we can't sit still. There are changes that we still have to make. We have things in our portfolio that go up and go down. It's and I think that sensing the market, being driven by the market, understanding the market, collecting data about the market, and recognizing what the market says about the things that you do, becomes very critical in this whole process, right? You sort of have to open yourself up, to rethinking that which you thought you understood clearly, to maybe some other ideas and other sources of input. What I like to say to my development people is that you think your product looks like the Gerber baby, but the customer thinks it looks like Winston Churchill. They always enjoy that.
Can we just pause on that visual for a moment? I think most babies look like Winston Churchill, so I think it's kind of one and the same. But let's go back to the customer for a second, Steve. So Beth Comstock, the Chief Marketing Officer at GE, she likes to refer to GE as a big startup. Mm-hmm. And we've had the good fortune of working with them, so I think she's kind of accurate in the way she approaches it. And the thing we talk about at MediaLink is we are fortunate to work with a lot of emerging media companies, but what we find is the larger established media companies want to be viewed as emerging. So having Beth refer to GE as a big startup, I find to be so interesting in terms of a Fortune 5 company looking at themselves as a startup. But I think, to overstate the point, Beth was quoted not that long ago about saying she is breathless about the amount of data that's available. Who's doing it right? Who are the clients out there? And I know you love all the girls equally, but who can you point to that's really getting a handle on the data and not suffering from the sort of junk in the trunk? It's there, I've got it, how do I use it? You gave some good case studies. Are there any that you could, shed some further light on without breaching any confidentiality?
Well, I think that there's, I would characterize our customer sets broadly in two categories. One, I think that very big companies that, by the way, spend a lot of money doing it. I mean, we all understand, Walmart, enormous business, collects huge amounts of data, unbelievable quantities of data, spends a fortune analyzing that data, has a lot of insight, clearly, on what's happening relative to their buyers, buying patterns, what happens in their stores. They don't always get it right, but they do react to when they get it wrong and make adjustment. And as a large company in an industry with very low margins, they're clearly among the best. And I think even their competitors tend to respect their aggressiveness and the way in which they come at analyzing data. Now, do they get opaque spots? Do they miss things? Are there more localized trends that they miss? Absolutely, right? And it's part of the challenge of being big. A specialty retailer is often right dead on the mark. Bass Pro, Cabela's, Moose Jaw Mountaineering. You pick your favorite hobby company, right?
How many people have Moose Jaw as their favorite retailer in this audience? Jeff
Moose Jaw
Dawson,
Mountaineering, right? Moose Jaw Mountaineering, right? These companies are right smack on top of exactly.
He's a mountain climber, so that's not fair.
But
how many other people have Moose Jaw as their
favorite? And of course, everybody always smiles when I give those examples, and they say, "Well, yeah, but we're a big business." No. Look at what they do, recognize that they get very intimate with their customer, and their websites become a destination. They think about, what do people want to do? I mean, you may like to buy the equipment because it's your hobby, but chances are it's your hobby because you like to do what you do with the equipment. You like to fish, you like to climb, whatever your activity is. And these companies that do a great job of understanding you, creating intimacy, loyalty, repeat buying, and so on, they're really focused on what do their customers want. And the challenge for every company is, okay, how do I embody that in what I do? Can I localize? By the way, the technology allows you a level of localization that you could never have achieved before. Previously you were dealing with very large buyer groups. These days you can get really down to a much more localized level. And there are companies that are working on leading edge loyalty programs. I know who you are, I know what you like, I know where you live, I track the weather, right? I know what you might buy because it's going to rain or snow. I know what's being promoted out there by my competitors. I want to play into that. Gee, this is getting a lot of buzz. Do we carry that? Do we stock it? Who do we merchandise to? Who do we promote this to in order to take advantage of what seems to be a groundswell around a particular product, right? Not even fully understanding all the dynamics of what's pushing the market in that direction, but this real-time reactive approach to trying to hit buyer groups in ever smaller numbers.
So you had a slide up there, Steve, earlier about media effectiveness and how the information today can, I think, drive better accountability and in sort of media effectiveness. Are you seeing companies that you deal with, and let's take IBM as a marketer. You're a large marketer. You're both a seller of
Yep.
services and systems, and yet you're also a very large marketer on your own. Are you drinking your own Kool-Aid? Are you making your marketing decisions? Again, and I'm a big believer in print, so I don't think print is dead, but yet you tend to be a very large print advertiser, and that might be viewed by some as going sort of against the curve of where the eyeballs are. Are you taking your own medicine here?
Yeah. In fact, some of the companies I had up there we acquired because we were using them for our own internal use. Because we've always understood that this coordination of your marketing initiatives, we're thinking about what you're doing in any sort of direct-facing activity, actual physical print, digital. How does that all come together? Does it create a consistent message? Do you create awareness that you're then able to feed into? I like to talk to my team about, it's a military campaign, right? And you're not going to win unless you get air superiority. How do you get air superiority? Is through a use of a whole range of marketing and outreach techniques in combination in a coordinated way on a sustained basis, to build a groundswell of interest around that particular topic or area that then your salespeople can take advantage of. The worst thing that happens is when your sales rep shows up and the customer doesn't have a clue what the hell you're talking about, right? Why would I even want one of those? I don't understand what you're talking about. So you clearly haven't prepared the market, right? There's no sense of need and no connection. So you've got to have that overarching air cover model, and you can't fragment it. And frankly, we have to discipline ourselves constantly on this because we have a large portfolio. There's always a temptation to, well, we want to sell this, we want to sell this, and so the number of messages begin to increase, the clutter increases, and you can almost begin to drown out your own message. Now, we compete in an industry that is a wind blast of information. It's hard to understand how any of our customers actually sort through all of the marketing and all the messages that are coming through. It's a high testosterone industry. There are a lot of tech companies that beat their chest, about what they claim to be their extraordinary capabilities. They hope that you never benchmark, so you never find out. You buy the product, and then you'll learn after the fact what you really got for your money. But it's a very tough industry from that perspective in terms of getting your message and your voice through. So that coordinated, metric-driven approach. And then we go back all the time and look at, did we get value from the way we crafted this? Did the messages hit? Were we getting the right combinatorial effect? And was the mix correct? And one of the things that we've learned, as much as we will often have a debate inside of IBM, about the leverage of digital, right? That, there's nothing cheaper than digital. So, digital, but you reach a point where you're not getting nearly the value you thought out of digital as you would.
Well, it depends how you define digital. I mean, digital is everything today. So
Well, it is.
if we're talking about digital in the context of online versus offline.
Well, online, all right, but different types of digital techniques, whether it has more structure to it or whether it's, simple bannering. A lot of what you have to understand is who's your audience, where do they go, what do they look at, how long do they dwell? On the print side, we have unbelievable debates inside of IBM relative to print content, right? And I'm sort of on one side of the fence, which is I believe that most of our customers are rapid page turners, and so I look for visuals that I believe will capture and leave a little impression as they turn the page. We have others in IBM that love to deliver a more sophisticated message, right? That let's put some value into this. I say, yeah, but that's fine, but people are not going to spend the time, reading this. You're trying to almost educate your customer. They're not in the mood for education, right? And a little bit of flashy graphics and so on may go further to get their attention and cause them to pause, than attempting to educate them with something that borders on being an editorial.
I think the creative agencies in our industry would take a little bit of exception to that, and only from the standpoint of if you do have something that catches somebody's eye, you will get them to a point where they then might engage in learning what you're trying to say, but you do have to get their attention.
If it's a page of text,
it's going to be hard.
It may flash over. One of the most, I think, amazing things that has occurred, and I would not have necessarily guessed that it would have been successful, but we do a lot on YouTube. We produce fairly sophisticated products. We do a lot of things on YouTube, a lot of little sort of mini webcast type things, little bit of information, little bit of education. We get tremendous traffic on these YouTube sites, some of which get pretty sophisticated in terms of the material that we put up there. And the relative value of things that connect more closely to what somebody is interested in, it's disproportionate. So I might think I'm being efficient through some form of rather simplistic digital marketing, but I'm getting very low yield on it. Whereas I go to something more sophisticated, if I'm getting multifold the yield, the benefit of that probably is greater per dollar spent than the benefit I'm getting from the wider distribution. So we're constantly going back and forth on the statistical analysis of what's delivering real value and then what kind of follow-up needs to be created, which is not identical for each channel and each vehicle.
So it's interesting that you talk about YouTube. You're obviously not producing cats on a skateboard, and you're obviously not producing, necessarily premium content as the new channels that were launched, in the last 18, 24 months. How are you driving those viewers to YouTube? Or are you relying strictly, because you bring it up, I can't help but drill down a bit, are you relying on the algorithm to drive viewers to those YouTube experiences? Or are you doing a 360 kind of...
It's a combinatorial effect, right? So if I have, more high velocity digital stuff occurring over here, does that drive people across to the YouTube site for going deeper on the topic? If I'm hitting the right audience, and there are tech audiences, remember, tech people are almost hobbyists in many ways, right? So many of our customers clearly are deep into technology. They actually want to spend more time on a topic if it's their topic, right? And so it's hitting them with some form of digital marketing that gets their attention, directs them to a site, or it's something coming through on the direct sales side where our sales reps will say, you really ought to look at this. This is the YouTube link. Go at it. This will explain it better than I can explain it, type of thing. And both vehicles work for us.
I think our time is coming to an end, Steve. But I would just advance the following thought: contextual relevance is important not only to tech dweebs, but it's important to everybody. And as marketers, I think we're all looking for that opportunity to find someone who's actually in market for the product or service we're selling.
Absolutely.
They're going to pay more attention to it.
Get the right person at the right time, you can close a sale.
So the final question I'd ask, I hearken back to a longtime friend of mine, Dr. Ruth Westheimer, who said size matters. It doesn't matter to her because she's so small, but are we only in the world of big data, or are we is there any little data that's interesting? And I'm being a little facetious, but you know, we keep going back and forth as to whether 2014 is the year of mobile. Is this the era of data? Let's not limit it to a year. Are we literally in the era of data?
All right, I think unquestionably. Look, as a species, we would love to predict the future. All of us would. You know, we know we're here on Earth for a limited time. We want to know what the future holds. We want to make the right decisions. You know, it doesn't matter what it is in your life. You wish you could see a little further into the future. And we certainly pursue those things in business as we do in other human activities. And I think, you know, the excitement around big data is the excitement around that possibility of becoming more predictive. And if I'm more predictive, I can do things smarter, I can get out in front, I can attack markets, I can win. I'm getting a whole set of secondary benefits. By the way, if somebody else figures this out and I don't, then I'm at a big disadvantage. And perhaps if I decide I'm going to hold back and not experiment, not try, they've gone through the learning curve, I'm just beginning the learning curve. I may never catch them. They may get out in front of me to the point where I can no longer be competitive.
I think that's a great note to end on. Steve, thank you very much for your time,
Mike, thanks.
and thank you for your attention.